So if you've never been introduced to the concept of a loop, just think about it this way. I'm sure you've seen an Excel sheet and you basically have rows going down the sheet, and each row has some data in it. If you want to read each row, you're going to have to go from one row to the next, and this can be accomplished basically with a loop. So if we look at it right here, here's a row, this is row 15, and it has some information in this row. So how do we go to the next row? Well, we got to add 1 to this row from row 15 plus 1, and get down to the next row, and we're on row 16, and we can basically read information from this row. So instead of using an Excel sheet, we'll look at a data structure that we've already covered, which is an array. So the array can be used to represent that Excel sheet where each element inside the array is a row of data. Instead of providing as much detail as I did in the Excel sheet, we're going to do something a little bit simpler. So we'll do something like best cars ever made. And we'll do an array, and each element inside this array will be technically representing like a row in the Excel sheet. So we'll say, like, for example, S13 240SX, and do another row, like that's 240Z, maybe the Mazda RX-7, the MK4 Supra, the R32, not M32, R32 GTR, and the R34 GTR. Let's do a couple of American cars, like the C5 Corvette, the C6 Corvette, and let's say the C8 Corvette, and maybe one German car, like the Porsche 911, let's end it off with Japanese again, Subaru STI. So that's a good list to start off with. We've looked at how to print an individual statement, but how do we print each statement from the array? So let's say, let's just recap. How do we print an individual statement? So let's say we want to print this Datsun 240Z. How do we do that? Well, we would use the variable name of the array. So we would say something like echo dat followed by the index count. So its index starts off at 0, so this is the first, 0 is the first one, the index 1 is the second one in the list, so we would say index 1 to print out the second one in the list, which is Datsun 240Z. So let's go ahead and open this up in the browser. Open that up, and sure enough, prints the 240Z. So we can use a loop to print out this array, and there are a number of loops that can be used to accomplish this task, but we'll start off with the while loop and work our way up. The while loop says, while something is true, keep doing something that's outlined in the loop body. So let's look at something simple first before we tackle the array problem above. So we'll say something like I is equal to 1, and we'll say while, and this is the way you would do a while loop. So you have the while keyword followed by parentheses, in which case you would do your expression that evaluates the true. If it evaluates the true, the statements inside the loop body, which is located right there, get executed. So what would be the expression? The expression in this case will be, well, I is less than or equal to 10, do something. So we could say echo I dot break, and then we have to increment I, because if we don't, this thing will just keep executing forever since this is not updated whatsoever. So we update I with that I++, and it should print out values from 1 to 10. So let's see what that looks like. Let's refresh our browser. And there we go, starts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I think now we're ready to tackle our array problem. So let's think about it. We could say, well, there are elements in the array, print out the array element. So currently we only know how to access array elements with the index, so we'll have to modify the expression above to be able to change, for example, index 1 to 2, and then to 3, to 4, and so on, so that we can loop through every single one of these elements. Instead of statically typing in 1 right here, what do we know that can change? Well, a variable can change, and we'll name our variable I for index and set it equal to 0. Then we're going to have to loop through the array, but how many times? Well, as many times as there are elements. So considering there are 11 elements, we're going to have to loop through it 11 times, starting at 0 and ending at element 10. So you can see right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say I is equal to 0 to initialize our index, and we'll create our little while loop structure. And we'll say while I is less than 11, since we want to start at 0 and end at 10, we can echo the variable name of that array is best cars ever made. And then instead of putting in an actual number in here, we'd put the variable I, since it starts at 0 and ends at 10, followed by, let's do the break tag. And of course, we have to increment I so that it actually loops through every single time. So initially it starts I is equal to 0. And it's going to echo out best cars ever made 0, which is S13240SX, followed by the break tag, followed by incrementing I plus plus. So next time around, it's going to be 1. Is 1 still less than 11? It is, so continue executing this. This time, this I gets replaced by 1, and the first or the second element, index 1, gets called, displaying Dotson240Z onto the screen. And it keeps doing that up until it gets to 10. So the 10th element is displayed. I gets incremented. This time around, I is 11. So it says, is 11 less than 11? No, it's not. So just go ahead and skip this whole thing and continue on. So let's save that and refresh it and see what we get. We should get each element from that array being displayed. And sure enough, we do. So there's S13240SX, followed by 240Z, Mazda, blah, blah, blah. It finally ends with the SDI. Since the best cars ever made can have a variable size, this array can have a variable size. So what happens now if I remove, let's say, these 4 items right here? Well, this is not equal to 11 anymore. Now it's equal to 7. Basically, cars can be removed or added, and we don't want to hard code the size of the array in the while expression every single time. We want it to be dynamic. So to get the size of the array, or to get the count, we can either use the count or the size of functions. And I know we haven't covered functions yet, but just know that we can put the array into either one of these functions, and it will let us know how many elements are in the array. So we can modify this expression up here. Instead of while I is less than 11, we can say while I is less than the count. So this is a function. It's an internal function in PHP. And we could say, well, I is less than the count of best cars ever made. So this function can accept this array, and it can return basically how many elements are inside this array. So in this case, it will return 11. So it's exactly like doing this. The only difference between this one and this one is that now I can go ahead and delete a couple of these, and this will automatically get modified, whereas this one will not, and I'll have to actually manually change it. Why is this important? Well, when you're retrieving items from a database, and that database gets updated, let's say pretty regularly, like multiple times a day, well then, if you're using a statement like this, you don't want to keep going in there and modifying the size of the database every single time, because I mean it's just unrealistic. You want to have a dynamic piece of code like that. So we can also tweak the inside a little bit. So we, instead of doing I++ right here, remember the increment, the post increment gets executed after the variable is called, right? So in this case, it would, let's say the first time around, we also want to make sure that I is equal to 0 again. First time around, it's going to say execute best cars ever made I, which is 0, and then increment it, right? So then assign I is equal to 1. But we're also going to need our little break tag. So this achieves exactly the same thing as this piece of code up here. So let's go back, and we should have a duplicate basically being displayed at the bottom, right? So here's the first time around, and here it is the second time around. That's the while loop in a nutshell. One final thing to note is that the while loop will evaluate the expression as either true or false, and then execute the statement inside the loop body only if the statement is true. If the statement is never true, right? So if, let's say this is equal to 20 right here, it will skip over the loop body and just move past it. So this part will never get executed. This is important for basically moving on to our next lesson where we cover do while loops.